Eviction? I whispered, the word tearing out of me like it didn't belong in my own mouth. The envelope hung there on my front door, trembling in the breeze like some cruel little flag. My neighbor's sprinklers hissed in the distance, birds chirped. Life continued exactly as it always had except for me. Across the cul-de-sac, Margaret stood perfectly still on her porch, pearls gleaming, posture so rigid you'd think she was posing for a portrait of suburban authority. She had her red leather binder clutched against her chest like it was scripture, like this whole performance was ordained. I didn't have to open the letter to know it was bad. I'd seen that red ink before, bold and smug across too many envelopes. Notice of violation. Notice of fine. Notice of non-compliance. But this one, stamped across the top in blocky crimson font, eviction. It felt like a punch in the gut. My house, my lawn, my dock on the lake, suddenly all of it was on the chopping block because Margaret and her HOA empire said so. Now, I should have walked inside, poured some coffee, maybe taken a few deep breaths. Instead, I ripped the envelope off the door, tore it open, and scanned the accusations. My jaw clenched tighter with every line. Failure to maintain community standards, unauthorized alterations to property, repeated disruptions of neighborhood harmony. Neighborhood harmony? I laughed out loud, half disbelief, half hysteria. The paper shook in my hands. Meanwhile, Margaret watched me with that smug half-smile, the kind you'd expect from a queen bee who's just set her rival's hair on fire and is waiting for the scream. Let me rewind a second. It started months back with my trash bins. Apparently, leaving them at the curb for 47 minutes past the acceptable removal time counted as my first violation. Margaret herself showed up to measure, clipboard in hand, like she was surveying a crime scene. The next week it was my grass non-uniform growth pattern, she called it. Never mind that we'd had the driest spring in 10 years. A week later, someone anonymous, of course, filed a complaint about excessive noise because I was hammering a loose board on my dock at dusk. Each time, a letter arrived, smugly worded, citing bylaws buried in pages no normal human could memorize. Each time, I thought, this is ridiculous. It'll blow over. But it didn't. Margaret had found her target, and apparently it was me. The escalation was so subtle I almost didn't notice it until I did. She began showing up at HOA meetings with photos of my house, grainy, zoomed-in shots like she was running her own surveillance unit. My mailbox door left ajar, a dandelion poking out from the edge of the driveway, my dog barking at the UPS guy. And every time she clicked her pen and leaned back with that syrupy voice, "We're all just trying to maintain standards here. Standards." That word could make my blood boil. I tried to fight back the normal way. I showed up at the meetings. I flipped through the bylaws, quoting the fine print back at her. I even rallied a couple neighbors who admitted, quietly, that Margaret had been targeting them too. But when it came time to vote, when it came time to put hands in the air, no one ever crossed her. Not publicly. She had them wrapped around her pearl-strangled finger. Which brings us back to this morning. I was standing there in my driveway, letter in hand, while Margaret pretended to water her potted plants. She tilted her watering can just a little too far, spilling a river over the rim, eyes locked on me. It wasn't about the plants. It was about the performance. "Morning," she finally called, voice sweet as saccharine. "Oh, I see you got the notice." I walked closer, waving the letter. "You've got to be kidding me. Eviction? For what?" She pursed her lips, tilted her head like a schoolteacher about to scold a child. "You've been given every opportunity to comply. The board voted unanimously. It's out of my hands now." That last part was the biggest lie. Everything in this neighborhood was in her hands. "Unanimous?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "Or did they just nod because they were afraid of you?" Her smile didn't falter. If anything, it deepened. We all want what's best for the community. And then she turned, heels clicking on her porch, and shut the door. For a moment, I just stood there, the sound of the slam echoing in my chest. The paper crumpled in my grip, sweat slicking my palms. The faint smell of freshly cut grass drifted from the neighbor's yard, but it felt like I couldn't breathe. I looked back at my house, the house I'd poured years into, the house with the dock where I taught my nephew to fish, the house with the porch swing I'd rebuilt 3 times over, and I realized something I should have known months ago. This wasn't about trash bins or grass height or phantom noise complaints. This wasn't even about me. This was about control, Margaret's control, and I wasn't about to hand it over, because if she thought an eviction notice was going to send me packing, she was in for a surprise. I folded the letter, slid it into my back pocket, and whispered to myself, 2 can play this game. The sprinkler across the street sputtered to a stop, leaving behind an eerie silence. Margaret's curtains twitched, just enough for me to see the shadow of her watching. I smiled back at the window, teeth bared, like I'd just been dared into something. And in that moment, I knew. The war had officially begun. "Oh, you want me gone?" I said, sliding the deed across the glossy boardroom table. "Funny, because you're all standing on my property." The silence that followed was delicious. You could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the squeak of Margaret's pearl necklace shifting as her throat tightened. Their binders, thick with bylaws, complaint forms, and color-coded tabs, suddenly looked flimsy, powerless. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the way every smug face in the room began to crack. But before we get to that moment, let me rewind. The week after that eviction notice, I couldn't sleep. My mind ran laps around every absurd violation Margaret had conjured. My lawn, my dock, my mailbox door left open a fraction too long. She was building a paper trail, tightening the noose. And at the next HOA meeting, she was going to present it like gospel. I needed leverage. Real leverage. That's when I remembered the parking lot. See, our HOA doesn't own much land. The manicured lawns, the lakeside docks, the pool, all funded by dues, all maintained by a patchwork of contracts. But the parking lot beside the clubhouse? That was different. It sat on an awkward strip of land tucked between the clubhouse and a drainage ditch, and years ago, when the subdivision was still under construction, the developer sold off parcels like scraps at a yard sale. I'd bought that strip without thinking much of it back when I first moved in. The surveyor practically begged me to take it off their books, dirt cheap. I figured maybe I'd use it to plant some trees, maybe put up a shed. I never did. It sat there, paved over, quietly leased back to the HOA for a token fee buried in their budget. And Margaret? She'd either forgotten about it or never noticed. Until now. I dug out the paperwork-yellowed pages, signatures in faded ink, but legal as the day they were filed. And the more I read, the more I grinned. I wasn't just the owner. I had every right to set the terms of its use. Rent, access, restrictions. The parking lot. The place where Margaret's kingdom assembled, where her board members strutted in with their leather binders and their smug handshakes. Without it, there was no meeting, no quorum, no show of power. By the time the next HOA session rolled around, I had a plan. The boardroom was a fluorescent-lit box inside the clubhouse, walls lined with cheap folding chairs, the faint smell of burnt coffee wafting from the corner. Margaret sat at the head of the long table, binder open, pearls gleaming under the harsh lights. She started the meeting with her usual pomp. "As you all know," she said, her voice slow and measured like a judge delivering a sentence, "the matter of Mr. Caldwell's repeated violations has reached its conclusion. His removal from the community is now in motion." She glanced my way, lips curling. That was my cue. I placed the deed on the table with a satisfying thunk. "Actually, Margaret, before you celebrate my eviction, there's something you should know." She didn't even glance at the papers at first. "We're in the middle of a vote, Mr. Caldwell. You'll have a chance to—" "No," I interrupted, keeping my voice calm, steady. "This isn't about my vote. It's about yours. Because the land your boardroom sits on the parking lot that got you here, it's mine. And as of today, the rent just went up." That got her attention. The board members leaned forward, brows furrowed, lips parting like fish gasping for air. Margaret finally slid the papers closer, scanning them with quick, jerky motions. Her knuckles whitened around the edge of the page. This can't be right," she stammered. "Oh, it's right," I said. "Clerical oversight. You've been leasing from me for years. I just never raised the rent. But given your sudden interest in my removal, I think it's only fair you pay market value." The room erupted. One board member sputtered about budgets, another hissed about legality, someone else muttered about the annual dues. Margaret slammed her binder shut, the sound echoing off the linoleum floors. "You can't hold this board hostage," she snapped. I smiled. "I'm not holding anyone hostage. I'm just a landlord collecting rent. You don't like the price? Don't use the lot." For a moment, she looked ready to leap across the table and claw the deed from my hands. But she didn't. She couldn't. The power had shifted, and she knew it. I leaned in, lowering my voice so it carried just enough menace. "You wanted me gone. But without that lot, Margaret, your little empire collapses. No meetings, no votes, no HOA." Her face, usually so controlled, so porcelain perfect, finally cracked. The pearl necklace that had once gleamed like a crown now looked like a chain, heavy and suffocating around her neck. "Consider this," I added, pushing back from the table. "Your notice of rent increase. Effective immediately." I didn't wait for her reply. I gathered my papers, tucked them under my arm, and walked out, the sound of my footsteps ringing against the hollow tiles. As the door closed behind me, their voices rose in frantic argument. Numbers, legal threats, whispered panic. And beneath it all, Margaret's sharp, trembling voice trying to reassert control. But control wasn't hers anymore. I stepped outside into the cool night air, the smell of damp asphalt heavy in my lungs, and looked across the parking lot, my parking lot. A dozen cars sat neatly lined in their spaces, every board member's vehicle at my mercy. And as I stared at those cars, an idea sparked. Maybe it wasn't enough to raise their rent. Maybe it was time to lock the gates. "This can't be legal," Margaret's voice cracked as she rattled the chain, the padlock clanging like a jail cell door. The board members stood stranded in the lot, suits pressed, coffee cups steaming in the cool dawn air, their shiny sedans and SUVs trapped behind a line of heavy yellow locks. A tow truck idled at the curb, its engine rumbling like a predator circling the herd. Their faces, once smug and certain, were now pale, pinched, and desperate. I watched from my porch across the street, coffee mug in hand, steam curling in front of my grin. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Margaret, the self-proclaimed queen of community standards, was now a queen without a throne. Let me explain how we got here. After the boardroom showdown, I spent the next 2 nights planning. Not ranting, not sulking, planning. Margaret thought raising their rent was the endgame. It wasn't. The truth was, money alone wouldn't break her grip. She'd spin it, bury the cost in next year's dues, and carry on barking about my violations. But without access to the lot, without a place to park, she couldn't hold a meeting. No quorum meant no votes. No votes meant no power. And the best part. All it took was a set of heavy-duty chains, 6 padlocks, and a few signs reading, "Private property, no trespassing." I'd even double-checked the county ordinances. Completely legal, completely enforceable. So at 3 in the morning, under the glow of a flickering street lamp, I went to work. The air smelled of damp asphalt and cut grass. The chains clanked as I threaded them through the gates, the locks snapping shut with a satisfying finality. When I was finished, I stepped back and admired my handiwork. The lot gleamed under the moonlight, every car space suddenly off limits, every inch of Margaret's empire fenced off by my will. By dawn, the trap was set. The first board member arrived at 6:45 sharp, a gray Lexus rolling in slow before stopping dead at the chained entrance. The driver got out, briefcase in hand, peering at the sign like it had personally insulted him. Then came another and another, their expensive watches glinting as they checked the time, their faces twisting in confusion. And then Margaret arrived. Red blazer, pearl necklace, binder tucked under her arm. She marched straight to the gate, heels clicking, and seized the lock like she could intimidate it open. "This can't be legal," she barked, voice pitched higher than usual. From where I stood, I called back, loud enough for the whole lot to hear. "Perfectly legal, Margaret. Landowner's rights. County clerk's office confirmed it." Her head snapped toward me, eyes blazing, but the damage was already done. The other board members were murmuring, their voices carrying on the cool morning breeze. "What do we do now? Where are we supposed to park? Can he really shut us out like this?" I could smell their panic, sharp as burnt coffee. Margaret tried to rally. She raised her chin, smoothed her blazer, and declared, "We'll move the meeting online until this matter is resolved." But even as she said it, I could see the cracks forming. One board member muttered something about bylaws requiring in-person meetings. Another asked who was paying for the tow truck now pulling up behind them. The driver leaned out the window, grinning. "Private property, no permit. These cars are fair game." That was the breaking point. Half the board members scattered, rushing back to their vehicles. Margaret stood her ground, binder clutched like a shield, but I could see her knuckles whitening. I strolled across the street, slow and casual, savoring every step. The smell of exhaust mixed with the sweetness of blooming azaleas. Neighbors were peeking through blinds, whispering on porches, their morning routines hijacked by this spectacle. "You wanted me gone," I said when I reached the gate, keeping my tone calm, almost friendly. "But now it looks like your HOA can't even meet without my permission." "You're sabotaging the community," she hissed, but her voice wavered. I leaned on the gate, metal cool beneath my arm. "No, Margaret. I'm protecting my property. You tried to evict me. Now you're the ones locked out." Her lips pressed into a thin line. For once, she didn't have a retort ready. The board members climbed back into their cars, engines revving, tires crunching over gravel as they retreated one by one. The tow truck rumbled forward, circling like it smelled blood. By the time the lot cleared, Margaret was the only one left, standing stiff and furious behind the chain. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about parking. This was about her power unraveling in real time. No meeting meant no fines. No fines meant no income. No income meant angry residents. And angry residents meant the crown slipping off her pearl-adorned head. I turned to walk back to my porch, savoring the victory. But before I reached the steps, I heard Margaret's voice, sharp and desperate, cutting through the morning air. "This isn't over, Caldwell." I paused, mug still warm in my hand, and glanced back. Her face was flushed, eyes wild, the binder pressed so tightly to her chest it looked like it might snap. For the first time, she wasn't the one holding all the cards, and yet the way she spat those words like a promise, not a threat, sent a chill down my spine. Because if Margaret wasn't bluffing, then round two was already on its way.